Hey guys, welcome. This is my first video as a part of my drawing tutorial series, where I've just made a bunch of videos to help you get started and get comfortable with drawing. This is the first video, which is actually the warm-up or preparation for it. So I need to make sure that you're comfortable moving the pen around the paper, and that's what this is for. So I'll be briefly going over things like materials you can use, how to hold a pen, and how to make effective line work. So just two things before we get any further. I'm going to be referring to the pen throughout because that's what I'm going to be using to draw. So if you're using a pencil, don't stress. And terms like make effective line work or any other ones that I might use, I'll explain them when I think that they're necessary to know. Not that I'm trying to hide anything, but I just think it can add to the confusion if they're not needed right now. You may already know this stuff or just be intuitively comfortable with it. Brilliant, have a look through. If there's anything that pops out, great. If you're not comfortable with it or you don't already know this stuff, perfect, that's why this is here. So I'm gonna bring the video up and we'll talk through it. So the first thing that people always ask me about are materials. What can you draw with, what can you draw on? And I always say the same thing, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to be a specialist art supply. It can be something really simple like this notebook here. Lined paper, squared paper, thin, thick, it doesn't really matter. As long as you can see what it is that you're drawing, it's fine. And the same thing really goes for what you can draw with. I always use two examples, the Bic Biro pens, and the second example is the HB pencil. Most people are familiar with these, and they're both fine to use. I personally won't be using these, as I have my own materials that I'm comfortable using, and they are, first of all, the pigment liner or fine liner pen, and secondly, the plain white paper cartridge A4 sketchbook, or just a normal drawing sketchbook if you want to call it that. The reason I'll be using the pigment liner is because the line work is easiest to see on camera. I guess I could use a pencil, and if I do, I always use a mechanical pencil like this one. Shows up fine, but today I guess I feel more comfortable using this. So grab whatever it is that you feel comfortable using and follow along. So like I said, today is the warm-up, and this is just a preparation to get you ready for what it is that I'll be teaching. And today we'll be doing three things, and they are the line, circle, and triangle. And these three things are important as they'll be underpinning pretty much everything that I will be trying to teach you over the next 10 lessons. And the first thing that I need to address is something that is quite intuitive, something that we've all probably already done, and it's just how to hold a pencil. This will be important for a few reasons, which will be more apparent later on. But for now, we'll just go over just basic dexterity around holding a pen. So what I use are my forefinger and thumb to grip the pen. And then I use my middle finger as a support underneath, sometimes using the ring finger, I guess you want to call it, or the fourth. And I move the pen around like this, so I can draw straight, small vertical lines fairly easily without having to move much of myself. A lot of people will use the middle and forefinger as a grip and the ring finger underneath, and they'll grip the pen quite tightly here. Whatever you feel comfortable using for now is fine, and you'll notice that you have a bit more control kind of the tighter you grip the pen. So that again will become more apparent later, but for now, whatever you feel comfortable is absolutely fine. So when I'm drawing a line, I like to consider two things. First is the mobility in your hand. This is just your fingers to wrist. And the second is the mobility in your arm, so wrist to shoulder. So reducing the mobility in your hand and drawing with your arm, basically. First of all, I'll just address the hand. So hold the pen however you feel comfortable. And what I just want you to do is just draw a few lines just using the mobility in your hand vertically, so top to bottom, just like this, and some horizontal lines side to side. And what you should find is that they're a very similar length to mine, just like this. And if you want to draw a longer one, even just from middle to the side of the page, just using your hand, what you might find is you draw kind of like this, move your arm, and then use your hand. And it creates this kind of broken line. So instead of using your hand to draw this kind of longer line, we're going to kind of stiffen, I guess, our hands, reduce mobility, and draw with our arms. So to draw a long horizontal line across the page, I keep my hand stiff, move my arm, and it creates a long, consistent line with no breaks in it. Okay, so now that you've done a few lines, what I want you to do is do more like this horizontal line. So just a few lines across the page and then a few vertical as well. Just exploring your hand movement and your arm movement, seeing if you can get different sizes, what works, what doesn't. There is one thing that I do want to address before we go forward onto circle and triangles, and that's feathering. Feathering is this. This is feathering. And this is something that beginners tend to lean to when they're drawing, especially when they're drawing details. It's not wrong, but it is an inconsistent line. And for the purpose of what we're trying to do, we're trying to make confident lines. So what I want you to do is avoid doing this and just draw more consistent lines. So the last, I guess, tip for when you're drawing small or you're keeping your hand still and you're drawing with your arm, is to just be aware of hand placement above, like this, or on the page. So if you're drawing short, long lines, vertical or horizontal, it doesn't matter. But it's just be aware of the underside of your hand, and if it's leaning on the page or not. So you can use this basically as a support. Most people do this, I think, intuitively anyway, when they're writing, and it's no different when you're drawing. So you just keep your hand on the page as support, hold the pen, and just kind of just drag your hand down, and it just makes for a neater line, I think. Of course, obviously, the only thing, just be aware of when your hand's on the paper that you can smudge the ink. Next up, we're drawing circles, and just like the lines that we drew before, we'll be using the same mobility kind of idea, which is mobility in your hand for the smaller circles and mobility in your arm, so wrist to shoulder, for your larger circles. I just want you to try drawing a few small circles first, and then larger ones afterwards. These small circles, try both ways. So just mobility in your hand, clockwise and anti-clockwise. And for the larger circles, try one or two with just your hand as well, and just see if that restricts your movement in any way. See how kind of large you can go without needing to use your arm, and then move on and use your arm to draw the larger circles as well. And what you may have noticed is that with the circle, or in fact with 3 of the circles here, I use the method of drawing the circle multiple times. I want you to try this. I want you to try drawing the circle multiple times. The same circle, so you'll draw 3 or 4 kind of rounds of it. Then I want you to try drawing the circle with the same motion, but for the first few rounds, what I want you to do is feint drawing it, then place the pen down and just make one mark. These aren't any specific ways that you need to draw circles or you need to draw, but it's just a way that I like to introduce drawing the shape to feel more comfortable with it. Okay, so third thing I want you to try and draw are triangles. The reason these are brilliant is because they help you change direction whilst teaching you to not lift your pen off of the paper. So instead of drawing a triangle like this and lifting the pen off each time you draw a line, I want you to practice doing it this way. The reason this is helpful is because you may need to include both hand and arm mobility when drawing at times. So rather than just using one or the other, both need to be used. And what a triangle does in different shapes and ways is teaches you how to change direction and potentially use your hand and arm together without removing your pen off the paper, which we learn from drawing lines that to draw a nice consistent line, you may need to do at some point. So rather than concentrate too much on what's going to go on later on, what I want you to concentrate on is what we're drawing here. So lines, circles, triangles, and just fill up the page trying different methods of how to draw these 3 things, testing things out. There are no wrong answers or right answers. Try your left hand or your non-dominant hand if you're right-handed and vice versa. Just play around with line work, what looks nice, what looks interesting, what doesn't, what you prefer. And just explore with different ways of drawing these 3 things. And it's all going to help later on with the things that I'm trying to teach you. So short lines, parallel ones, lines that sprout off from a different point, circles, ovals, ellipses. And remembering when you're drawing triangles, try not to lift your pen off the paper. Draw triangles of different shapes, different sizes, everything. That's the end of the warm-up. I just want you to draw those 3 things, fill up your page, and you should be ready for lesson 1.